Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Decryption, and I hope you are well. For the longest time, I believed that creating a new collision profile inside of Unreal to only track the player was more efficient. Take this scene I've got here with all these NPCs. They're just programmed to walk to one side, then the other, every single one. And I've got my trigger box in the middle here. Say it does dialogue or starts a mission, anything you want. But if we play it, every time the NPC runs through, it's going to trigger that they're running it. Look at all the hits we've got. Collision firing off the hook. So naturally I thought, obviously, there's got to be a better way. So we'll create a player-only collision. So when I run through it, it says player hit, and we can turn it so only the player does. In my head, this is a much better way, right? But it's not. It's actually a lot worse for it. And we're going to find out why today, so let's get started. So a quick look at the setup. All these AIs are programmed to do is to literally walk over to this target point. When they reach it, walk over to the other side. And they do the opposite, walking back. That's all they do. The key for all this is inside my trigger test here. This is a common approach people do. They check if it's the player pawn. You can also drag off and cast to the player. There's many other ways you can do it. If it's true that it's the player, then I'm going to do player hit. If it's false, then it's going to do NPC hit. Right? Super basic. And that's, for the most part, what most people will do. They'll not print out NPC hit. So what I did is go through all the process and the pain it is to learn the collision settings, and I added a brand new one of player-pawn overlap. And what this does is will ignore every single collision unless you are specifically the player. So you can see nothing is firing, but if I run through player hit, it fires. So logically, I thought that was the best way, and it does seem like it's the best way. But it actually comes with so many disadvantages, it's not actually better at all. So the first thing is, will the NPCs hitting this actually cause performance issues? In reality, no, it doesn't look like it does. The NPCs hitting this on a collision check and then checking if it's the player is nanoseconds at best. Absolutely microscopic amounts of tiny speed. And we can semi-test this. If I put my stat FPS on, you can see my FPS here, kind of running at 90 or 40. It jumps between 40 and 90. That's quite a big gap, but that's just Unreal. So if I play it, and all these NPCs are hitting it, you can see it's hitting 90. It's not doing anything because only I'm triggering it. If I run up, you can see it prints out and it's still hitting 90. If I come and set this trigger back to overlap only pawns, which is where it was before, so every pawn hits it, including the player, and you'll see as they run through and it's triggering it, it doesn't really change that much. It does drop a little bit, but it's very, very micro amounts, and that's, let's face it, a weird scene. You're not really going to have that many NPCs all hitting the exact same trigger at the same time kind of thing. It's an extreme example. But for the most part, it's not really doing much to it. If I knew how to use all the graph stuff better, we'd look into that and see time-wise. But realistically, it's nanoseconds. It's not going to touch the frame rate of your game that badly. So what are the actual disadvantages of it then? And this is where I figured out it's not actually better to do it this way. So for example, in my game, I've got the ability to take over some characters. So imagine GTA where you've got multiple characters. I don't believe I've actually got it working. I know how to do it and everything. It's dead easy. You just possess one. I think I've just disabled the functionality when I was testing stuff. Yeah, I broke it. So you're meant to be able to take over multiple different characters, and I haven't got that in yet. But when you're not one of the other characters, they're going to be treated as an AI. Which means what you're going to have to do is make sure when you change characters, you don't just possess the character, you also reset their collision profile so they're treated as a pawn and not a player's pawn, which is an extra step it's now got to take when you change characters. Also, a bunch of the AI stuff, like the AI perception checks for pawns by default, so you've also got to remember to include the player in that. And then, on top of all of this, in the collision settings, where I've added the player, I basically just want the player to copy the pawn, but just have an extra flag saying you are the player, right? So that means in here, I've got all my details and it's set to block the player so they can't run into it. And on the player, it does the exact same thing. But if I add another collision tag, say up here, and I say, I don't know, I've added something brand new, spaceships, yeah? And I set everything by default, you've got to ignore the spaceships, okay. And then I say, oh, no, not the pawns, though. They have to be blocked by the spaceships. And if I forget, we've got a bug in the game already. Because the player, even though they're based on pawn, doesn't block it. So now you've added extra complexity steps to it in order to have to patch it up. And likewise, if I come and delete the spaceship and add another one and say, I don't know, black holes, apparently, and I set everything by default should block a black hole, right? And I go, oh no, not the pawn, they shouldn't block it. Oh, and not the player, they shouldn't block it either. But then I've also forgot the player overlap, because they are now blocking it, which will break the functionality. So even though we're stopping every NPC from triggering the collision, we're adding so many extra steps to it. Another one is on your player, so I've got my normal character here. It's based on the gas player, but it really is a normal one. I've had to set them to this new collision preset. I've not set my other characters to this collision preset yet, meaning they're all broken. So it's more and more of these things that I've found out. It's really just not a great way of doing it. Now, looking online, there are times when this is really good for your game. If you are just doing a single player game, and you can't take over any other characters, you can't possess anything other else like vehicles or anything like that, this approach can work for you. And I'll show you how I've done it in a moment. I just want to give you all of the heads up that I found. And there was a few more things that I found online to why people were saying you shouldn't do it. Because it does give you fewer overlap events, which in theory is nicer. That was my theory behind it. But it creates such a more complex collision setup when you've got all of these extra things. Because the main thing is, the way the collision settings in Unreal works is by something called a matrix. Not the Matrix with Keanu Reeves. A matrix like this random picture I've found online, where you have things across the top and things down the bottom, and it says whether or not it should collide or, do whatever. At the 0 here at the top, you might have pawn. Down here, you've got pawn as well. So should a pawn block a pawn 1, 0, 2, it will be, ignore, overlap, or block kind of thing. And it'll do it for every single one. It's called a 2D matrix, if you wish. But the problem is, we can't tell players to base themselves off of pawn and then just have slight override, like you do with parent and child blueprints. You can't do that with Unreal's collision system. So that causes a slight issue, but it also just adds more complexity to it. If you open up pawn here, you've already got a bunch of types you need to edit whenever you add a new collision preset. If I add player, spaceship, everything else as an object type, you have to configure more and more of these. And for example, with the player, I had to go down every single one of these presets and make sure it was correct. So things like overlap only pawns and ignore pawns, I had to set correctly. And it's a lot of upfront work, and then it's even more upfront work when you've got to actually use it in the system. It gives you a maintenance overhead, so you do actually have to modify pawn and player and the pawn overlap and the other overlaps if you make any changes to it. It's not great, really. For many years, I've thought this was the better way, but Unreal's collision system was really confusing to get your head around. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't add object channels. There are absolutely cases for it. It's just in the case of should you have one specifically for the player, most of the time it's seeming like no is the better answer. So how did I actually set this up, though? For those who have heard all the warnings and you need this in your game for some reason, how do we do it? It's actually really simple once you get your head around it. It just takes a bit to do it. So what you have up here is you have object channels, trace channels, and presets. An object channel is a type of object in your game. A pawn, a vehicle, a player in this case, a UI, something like that. A trace channel is something you can trace off of. So that's anything that's visible, anything that's a pawn, anything that's UI, or in this case, the extras that's been added, my chess game set, the traversable, and the hit trace for climbing and stuff like that. Extra trace channels. Presets are how you configure the collisions in your game, how everything links up, how you build the matrix up. So on the pawn here, we're saying, is the collision enabled? It's query and physics. So physics is you run into each other, you block each other. Should you be blocking each other, or should you just pass straight through each other, like with the trigger? We don't want the trigger, well, wait a minute, here, to block everyone. If we do, they're just going to stop and run into it. It's not going to be great. We'll set that to either collision, ignore, or overlap, so they can go through it, or we'll set the collision enabled to be query only instead of physics. And query is the tracing channel. So this one here, trace, and the overlap, should it trigger it? So this is the matrix down here. For pawn, what should each of these do? So for player, I've said block. They shouldn't be able to walk into anything that's the player. If I come and set this to ignore and click accept, you'll see that I'll now be able to walk through the pawns. See? I can walk through them. Kind of. Yeah, see? They're walking straight through me. The camera's freaking out. But that's because I've set them to ignore the player. So I'm going to set it back to block, but I'm going to get rid of this in a minute because, like I said, it's not great, especially for my game. So how do you set it up? So you add a new object channel here, and when you click new, you have two options. The name of it, so I've called mine player, and the default response, block, overlap, or ignore. What you want to do is set this to the one that will be the most common for you. So for the player, most things I want to block by. The vehicles, ragdolls, walls, destructibles, physics, pawns, I want them all to block the player and not run through them. So I set it to default block. All that does is just loop through all of these and just tick the option by default. That's it, that's all it does. So realistically, it doesn't matter what you tick there, it just saves you a little bit of a headache later. Then your next job is to come through here and adjust every single one of these presets to do what it needs to do for the player. So for example, ignore only pawn by default would have been set to block. But if we're ignoring the pawn and the player is technically a pawn, you want that to also ignore it. What I did is I basically clicked down all of these and I looked at whatever the pawn was. If the pawn was set to something, I'd do the same thing. That's all I did. So this one here, you see they're all actually set as block, right? But the key thing is you have to look at the collision enabled. It's got no collision, no trace, nothing. So all of these are actually just ignored. But if you come to say overlap all, it's not set to block look, it's set to overlap. So that's the first thing you do. So the next thing we have to do is we have to set up a preset to say our player is going to be a type of our object of player. What are their collision presets? So we're going to set up a new preset here. You just click new and type in whatever you want. So I just called mine player, like you've got a pawn one. And I set it to the exact same as the pawn. So collision enabled, query and physics. We can query on them, trace on them. They can run through things. Perfect. The object type, this is where we use our new one. So I set it to player. Put a description in. I didn't, so I was just testing things. And then this is where you go down and build up the matrix for this object type. So for me, I followed pawn, which was blocking everything. And on the player, I also clicked block as well. Once you've added this player preset, you can now tell your actual player you are using this new object type. So I came to my player, click the capsule component, because that's typically where it generates the overlaps from. Scroll down, just double check it's marked as generate overlap events. If it's not, chances are you are generating it from somewhere else. For me and the GASP project, it's using the capsule component. So just come in and set it to the collision presets, your new one of player. And you'll see it's configured the object type and everything we need. If yours is unticked as generate overlap events, just click down your different things. It might be the mesh that typically does it. So you can scroll down, you can see, for some reason mine's set weirdly. I don't know why GASP is set like that. I don't know. But you can set it to whatever you want. I believe it's typically set to character mesh, but I'm not sure. But I'm going to set mine back to that anyway. But if you don't see it there either, so you can see mine's unticked as generate overlap events, which means it's not going to really query anything or do anything. So it doesn't hugely matter what it's set to. Maybe that's why it's set like that. It was just untick that, it doesn't need to worry about it. And that's pretty much the player setup. Now the next thing is you have to configure your trigger to use the new collision profile. So on the trigger here, I've just got a super basic setup. And on the box, at the moment it's set to overlap only pawn, which as you can see, for the player, will overlap it, but it will also overlap it for the pawn, which means they'll both trigger this. So what you need to do, come back to your collision settings, create another new one, and call this player pawn overlap only player, whatever you want to call it. And I've set mine to query only, because it only really does need to query if something's overlapped it. It doesn't need to worry about actual bumping into it or blocking it. It doesn't need to. I've set it to world dynamic because that's what the overlap only pawn did, so I copied it. It just basically means anything that's already in the world or is spawned in, essentially. And then I've basically gone through and ticked ignore on absolutely everything except the player object type. So what that's going to do is say anything that touches this, just completely ignore. Don't even bother trying to query it, which is perfect. And then only if the object type of player, which is what we've set on this one right here, only that one will overlap it. And then, in theory, we can take this collision box, we can disconnect absolutely everything, and we can just put in player hit. None of this check we have to do anymore. Hit compile on the box, just make sure it's set to the player pawn overlap. File save, and you can run it. You can see they will all run through, absolutely nothing will print out until I casually walk through and it goes player hit. That's it. There. So in theory, you can see why in my head the logic was, surely this is so much better. No collision hits from any of these. And yes, that part I am right, it is generally better. There's no more overlap. But with the way Unreal's collision system is designed, and most of the things are designed towards a pawn specifically, it makes it really challenging to keep and maintain. Because like I say, the biggest one for me that's put me off this is that when I change characters, the other character needs to become an AI now. They no longer need to trigger the player overlap, which means every time I change AI, whether it's a cutscene, a quest, a button action, or anything, I need to remember to go through and set the collision settings, not to player, but back to a pawn. And then I need to switch the other one to a player. Every single time I do it. You could argue that's not that bad to do, and yeah, realistically it's not. If you build a central place in here, and you use the on possess and on unpossess, and you switch them around, it's fine, right? But it just makes development a little bit harder, essentially, because like I say, any other plugins you add with their own collisions in, you've got to make sure you come in and also apply it to the player and to any overlaps you've created, and it gets a bit tough to maintain. Now you will actually see something like this though, where it is detecting collision against the player, if you've ever seen the areas where the player can't walk through but the NPCs can. So what I mean by that is you sometimes see it on games where you have like a building, make a fake building, where you have a building here, and you're not allowed to walk in there, right? The door opens, the NPC comes through. You have that often, but you don't want the player to go in there. So how do you stop the player going down there? Because as you can see, the nav mesh lets them through, but the player can also walk through it. So what we can do is if we move this way, and go back to our collision settings, instead of just player overlap, just for testing, we'll just set it to block. The player's not allowed to walk through this, but everybody else is. And you'll see if we play it this time, all these NPCs will walk through, that's fine. But if I try to walk through, I can't. It's blocked me. And you can see everyone else is going through. You see that in a lot of games. Equally, you can do it the other way as well. So say if there's an area like Left 4 Dead, where you can go into the safe zone and the NPCs can't get in, but the other AI needs to get in, you can add custom collision presets for that. So if I come in and say the player, oh no, they can go through this one, but if I go into the overlap and say, oh, the player does overlap it, but if I come to the pawn and say, oh no, you are blocked, you can't go through this, you'll see this time, the AI will just stop. They can't get through, which is essentially what you see in games like Left 4 Dead when they try to run through. Obviously, you do this better, you query beforehand, these guys are freaking out, thinking, oh no, I can't get to where I need to go. But I can walk through completely fine though. So there are advantages to this method, and honestly, I was going to bin this video off. As soon as I managed to get this working, because that was on my task list for the next video, and I started looking at it all going, it not only took me a few hours to figure out how to do all of this, and yes, it saves the overlap events, but it adds more overhead for development later, is it really worth it? So yeah, there you go. I was kind of wrong. I came into this video, I was like, I'm going to do it, and then I figured it out, and I was like, no, I was wrong, you shouldn't do it. And then I've taught myself back semi on the path. It might work for you. So, but yes, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That's how you do collision profiles specifically for the player, essentially. It's all down to here and figuring it out. The key thing is You need an object type for the player, you need a collision preset for the player, you need to set it to copy the pawn, and you need to go over everything to tell it what to do for the player. That's essentially it. Once you kind of get that in your head, it's kind of dead easy to do, and you can set loads up. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. There is something different, I guess. Let me know what you think. Are you going to add this to your game? Do you not care about the development overhead? Because performance-wise, I think it is better. Even though it's a few nanoseconds, it still is better. The code can be smaller. We don't need any of this. You don't need to cast to it. You don't need to use the get player pawn. If you're a multiplayer, it's a lot quicker because you just put that in and set the right trigger. Or do you think that the overhead for the development is not worth it? You may as well just keep doing this. For me, I'm not sure. Generally, I am not sure. I don't know if I'm going to keep this in. It feels cleaner. I've got a lot of places where the NPCs will hit the trigger that only the player should. So I don't know. Let me know what you think below. Are you going to add this into your game, or are you just going to stick with doing your conventional get player pawn, casting to it, or something like that? Personally, I wouldn't cast to it. The last thing I'll say is the main reason I wouldn't say cast to it is if I come to the trigger and do reference viewer, you can see the only reference this has got is to the player only spawn, right? Dead small. If I come in and say, oh yeah, let's cast, is this my sandbox character? And connect it up and say, oh, only if it casts to it, yeah? You've now added an extra reference to this. If I reference viewer it, you can see we've now got an extra reference onto it, which just makes it a bit bigger. And if you imagine all the different triggers you're going to have in your game, quests, dialogue, random event triggers, NPC bandits, entering a door, all of these triggers, all linking to the player, it's just extra work for the engine to do. So it's generally not great to do a cast unless you really need to and you know what you're doing with it. I'd personally just do it like this if you were going to do it, or find another way to do it, because there's probably loads of different ways. I keep seeing a note online which says is controlled, but I think you can only get that if you cast to a pawn. Yeah, you've got the is locally controlled one, which tells you if you're controlled by the player. But yeah, for me, I always do this way because I'm writing a single player game. But if you follow the collision part, then you can just do that and make it a lot easier for yourself. But yeah, let me know what you think. I might keep this in and see how it goes, but I might remove it because if I run into loads of issues. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I know it was a little bit different, but it's something that's bothered me for a while to figure out how the collision parts work. So we did, and we've shared it. So thank you for watching. My name is Decryption, and I will see you next time.